All right, I have got a Vulcan carburetor that we put in the ultrasonic cleaner Friday of last week. So it's been Saturday, Sunday, Monday, 3 days, and we've been keeping it warm that entire time. Just curious, if I did that, what would happen to that carburetor? Probably not the wisest thing to be doing it on a $500 carburetor, but I was just curious how it would hold up in those kind of temperatures for that long. So we ran it on Friday, actually turned the actual ultrasonic part of it on, not just the heat, and cleaned it up really good. And then I left it over the weekend. Then I came in Monday, did some work, and was getting ready to pull it out again. I went ahead and let it run for another 30 minutes at that 50 Celsius temperature there. So now I'm going to pull it out, and we're going to go through it and see if we destroyed anything, if it's damaged. You can see the parts there now, and I think a lot of that's going to be able to clean up, hopefully. You can see the steam coming off of there now. Boy, I don't know. It's not looking good. I'm going to keep you posted, though. I'm going to take this over to our workbench. I'm going to spray it off with compressed air. Typically, when you do this ultrasonic cleaning, you don't actually have to take carbon choke cleaner then and clean up these parts afterwards. Unfortunately, I think we're close to being destroyed and discolored there. So I think at this point, carbon choke cleaner is going to be our friend, and we're going to have to do that to get these parts completely cleaned off here. Here you can see pretty discolored. Looks like some pretty murky water there. Carbon choke cleaner. Again, typically you wouldn't use this on here. The reason why you use an ultrasonic cleaner, besides the fact that it does a really good job of cleaning, but is so you're not having to use these chemical products. But you know what? That cleans up pretty stinking nice. I'm going to take compressed air now and blow through everything. I was afraid of this. This butterfly is sticking a little bit, and that's typically going to be your brass or your metal parts there. And so I'm going to take a little lubricant, spray it in there, see if we can get that to move back and forth freely. Then we'll go through some of those other parts there that look like maybe aren't going to be quite as easy to clean up. Some of these parts I'm actually going to take over to the sink and wash some of these off. This diaphragm here, I really don't want to get carbon choke cleaner on it. It just kind of ruins those. So. Today I have a carburetor off of a Kawasaki Vulcan 7. This is a key-in carburetor. It should say that on the side there. It should say key-in Japan. Should have a CVK. It's got some identification numbers down here. We've got a front carburetor and a rear carburetor, and it'll have an R and an F on the side of these carburetors here. This carburetor is different from most carburetors that I've gone through. I've gone through hundreds of carburetors, done lots of different videos, and this one is one of the most unusual carburetors that I've ever been through. I've gone through Gold Wing, 4-cylinder, 4 carburetors, other V-twin carburetors, and this just has an unusual design, so I wanted to show you how to rebuild it, how to go through and clean it, what to look for while you're doing that. First thing you're going to want to do is split these carburetors. I've actually taken this carburetor and put it in an ultrasonic cleaner already. So it's already cleaned out, ready to go, but I just want to dismantle it, show you which parts to replace when you do rebuild it, and I want to show you what areas to clean, what areas not to clean, and completely go through it. So grab yourself a Phillips screwdriver. You can take, typically if your motorcycle is not going to start here, it's because of your pilot jet, and that's going to be under these two Phillips screws here is a cap. The other thing you can do if your bike's sitting for the winter, or you're going to leave it sitting for a time period, you can take and actually unscrew this cap right here. There's one here and there's one here, and that's the bowl of the carburetor. This is typically where your float would be at. In this case, all you have in here is a couple of jets, but either way, your fuel is going to sit down in this area. You can take and back this out, a couple of screws here, and fuel is going to drain out of this nipple here, and then on this carburetor here, it's going to drain out of this nipple here. If your motorcycle is not running good, you're going to for sure, if nothing else, make sure you pull these covers here and remove the jets. Make sure those jets are cleaned out. Make sure there's no dirt and debris down in there. If you don't, you're going to cause in If you don't, and that motorcycle is not running good, what you could potentially cause is a lean fuel mixture, and then you could burn up your cylinders that way. So go ahead and remove those. Again, 2 Phillips screws to remove that. And at this point, if you have not already drained the fuel out of your carburetors, they will be leaking fuel all over the place. So obviously we've done that already. Take and remove both of these. And underneath there, you'll see your jets. You do want to inspect this O-ring, make sure it's in good condition. Make sure you keep that stuff together there. Here is your pilot jet down in here. Here's your main jet. Your main jet here is basically when your throttle is a quarter throttle to wide open, your main jet is doing its work. Your pilot jet here is when you're sitting there idling, or when you've twisted that throttle, there's going to be fuel coming up through that pilot jet all the way up to a quarter throttle and even past there. But that's typically if your bike is not running good, anywhere between 0 throttle and a quarter throttle. A lot of times it's because of this pilot jet. You're just starving your bike for fuel most of the time. You can get different sizes of these jets. I suggest checking your owner's manual, or if you've added performance parts to this motorcycle, you can check the website that you get the performance parts from and make sure you've got the right size jets in there. We're going to go ahead and remove the main jet at this time. This main jet came out with the main jet holder here, which is just this shaft here. It's got different holes. If it does that, that's okay. You just want to make sure that you can see through this jet completely along with the main jet holder. You also want to make sure that these holes are cleaned out and that it's not plugged up at all. To get that main jet off of that holder, a couple different ways you can do that. You can put a wrench on there and then take your flat screwdriver and turn it out, or you can put it in a vise. Typically, they're not very tight because they are a brass jet and you just don't have to tighten them up that much. So there's your main jet here, and it should have a size written on it. This looks like it's going to be a 132. Your main jet holder will not have a size, but again, you want to make sure that all these ports are cleaned out and in good condition. We've got your main jet set aside there. Now we've got your pilot jet down in here. Make sure you completely have that unscrewed, and then it sits. You can take and tip that carburetor upside down, or you can just take and grab that pilot jet just like this. Again, you want to make sure you can see through this. Make sure you blow through it with compressed air, carbon choke cleaner. Make sure that that port is completely cleaned out. It's a very, very small orifice. I've got jet cleaners here, and your main jet here is going to use almost the largest needle to clean this out. Your pilot jet is going to use a smaller needle than what's even on this set here. So I just grabbed actually a fine strand of wire and stuck it through there, but you absolutely need to be able to see through there and blow through there and shoot carbon choke cleaner through there. If this is not cleaned out and you cannot see through there, you don't have the right size orifice in there, your motorcycle is going to be running lean. It's not going to idle well. So setting those aside, we have the exact same thing over here, so I'm not even going to bother taking this apart. It's got a cap just like this. It's got your main jet holder just like that. Your main jet and your pilot jet is all in here just like this side. So I'm going to set that aside. Now we're going to go through the top of the carburetor here. I'm going to go through this one here. Again, they're going to be identical. Take a Phillips screwdriver here. You've got 4 Phillips on the top of this carburetor. And I take and I hold my hand on top of this carburetor. It is spring loaded. You're not going to have pieces go everywhere, but I just like to make sure that I hold that cap on there until I get all these screws completely off of here. Underneath of this cap is a diaphragm. It's a rubber diaphragm that rips very easily if it's not seated in the proper area. You're going to have leak. Again, you're going to cause your bike not to run properly. Pull that cap off of there. Sometimes that slide or that diaphragm here will actually get hot enough to where it'll kind of weld itself to this cap. When you pull this cap off, sometimes that diaphragm and that slide and that needle are all going to come out at the same time. If that happens, just be very careful. Make sure you don't bend or torque that in the wrong direction and rip this diaphragm here. These are expensive. Sometimes these are, sometimes you can't get these diaphragms anymore, and causing them to be very, very pricey. You've got a spring in here. You can pull that out. Next, you can take your finger there, stick it through here. Again, being very careful so you don't rip that diaphragm all the way around there. You can take your finger that's in the venturi here and push up on this slide here, and that's going to push this up. What you never want to do is take a screwdriver, stick it down in that groove, and pry up on it just like that. You're going to rip that diaphragm. It's very, very fragile. If you get carbon choke cleaner on here, I suggest you wash it off really well with water. You can set it in a windowsill, let that sun come down on it and kind of dry it out. You do not want carbon choke cleaner or gas or any kind of cleaners on this rubber diaphragm here because it will weaken that and cause some issues. Again, if that happens, make sure you dry it out for plenty of time so that diaphragm isn't weakened. Now you can take your needle, push it up just like that. We've got your holder there. You can set that aside. Then we have your needle here. This needle is not adjustable, but they do make different sizes here. It'll be engraved on the side of your needle there what size it is. Your slide looks like that there, and you want to make sure that that's all in good condition. Make sure that that slides up and down freely because when you work that throttle, that's going to suck air through your venturi. It's going to cause that diaphragm to slide up and that needle and that slide to slide up, allowing more air to flow through there and then allowing more fuel to be sucked up through the bottom of that bowl there. We're going to set that diaphragm and that slide aside there, and we're going to take now and dismantle this carburetor from each other. You're going to have actually 3 main pieces here, and I just wanted to show you how to do that. Your throttle cable is going to come down. It's going to hook into here. You're going to have a pull and a push on these mounts here. When you twist your throttle there, it's actually going to take and pull this joint up here, and then that's going to open up your butterflies. You're going to be able to see here on this carburetor here, when we twist that throttle, it's going to open up that butterfly just like that. It's going to allow more air to flow through there, and when that happens, we got wide open throttle right now. At that point, your slide's going to be open just like that. Your needle's going to be clear up. That's going to allow the most amount of fuel possible to be flowing through your carburetor there and down into your engine. Now, if you have the wrong size needle in there and your slide is completely open just like that, if you have too long of a needle or too short of a needle, you're going to have too much fuel or not enough fuel dumping into that engine. Now, the same thing's true if you've got the wrong size jet in there. If you get the wrong size main jet, it's going to allow too much if your jet is too large, or you're going to not allow not enough if your jet is too small, because that jet is the only thing controlling your fuel when you're wide open just like that. So you want to make sure that you have the correct jet in there so you're not starving that motorcycle for fuel, or you're not running too rich of a mixture causing buildup in that motor. You've got your choke plunger here. There's one on the other side of that carburetor. When you pull that lever to engage that choke lever, it's actually going to take, and I'm going to do this so you can see it here. It's actually going to take, when you pull that lever there, it's going to take and slide that plunger up just like that. And then it's going to do the same because of this shaft running all the way through here. It's going to do the same on that side there. So you can see when I push that lever on the other carburetor there, it's actually raising the other plunger as well. On this side here, you've got your idle adjust. Turn it in to turn your idle up. Turn it counterclockwise to turn your idle down. And essentially what that's doing is opening your butterfly. You can see here your idle adjuster screw meets your butterfly valve here. And you give it throttle, it's going to open those butterflies. You turn this in, your idle adjust in, it's also going to open those butterflies. So keep that in mind. Here is your adjuster here. If that idle is not adjusted properly on both of those carburetors, you want them to be opening up the same. We're going to start with the rear of the carburetor here. We've got 3 Phillips screws on the side of this area here, and this plate, I'm going to call it. And underneath of this plate is your float and your needle valve. And I'll show you that when I get it off of there. Got 3 Phillips screws. And these are going to be slightly larger than the rest of the Phillips screws on this motorcycle. So you're not going to have a hard time remember which ones go where over here, because again, they are a little bit larger than the others. We've got the 3 off of there. Now, you'd think at that point you can just take and pull that carburetor and split it apart. There's more you've actually got to do. Flip your carburetor over then, And over here, you've got your choke plunger and your lever here. This is where I was telling you just a second ago, when you pull your choke lever, that's what's opening up here. Take and remove this screw here. Don't remove the other side of this linkage here. They look real similar, but the other side has a spring. Just a couple more parts over there if you remove that side. So there's your screw there. Make sure you keep those washers together there. Then you can take and actually remove that linkage here as well as the arm there. You can actually just take and leave that arm there attached to the arm. You just want, or attached to the linkage there. You just want to make sure that is not going too far. Now, the next thing you're going to want to do is down in here. So on this side, you remove the plunger here, this arm that goes to the plunger, and then there is a keeper down here, a cotter pin that runs in to your linkage for your cables. So you can take and actually remove this pin here. Very, very small. I suggest grabbing a smaller pair of pliers just like this. Take and remove that and set that aside. Make sure you hang on to that unless you have more of them. And then you can take, and now you've got that carburetor completely separated. Now you want to make sure that in here, you take and make sure all this is cleaned out. So this is where your jets were here. All these should be opened up. There should be no debris sitting in here. You've got a couple different ports clear down in here, like this one here. Very, very small orifice that runs all the way down here, down into your jet area here. And then you've got your butterfly here. You want to make sure that that moves freely. Make sure it snaps back into place. You can take a wrench here and remove this plastic cap. This is your plunger for your choke assembly. Remove that. Make sure that that spring is working properly and that's in good condition. You can take put that back in. All of this can be cleaned out with carbon choke cleaner and blown through with compressed air to make sure it's in good condition. Again, where your slide is and your diaphragm, clean all that out. Make sure that that port here is clean and free. Make sure that these orifices here you can blow through with compressed air and carbon choke cleaner. So that's that portion of the carburetor. Carburetor's there. We're going to set that aside. Now we have your float here. And it's going to sit like this on the motorcycle. When fuel comes in here, it's going to come down this area here. It's going to come through your needle valve here. And your float here is going to shut that fuel off. When that bowl area is filled up with fuel, it's going to raise this float. And it's going to shut the fuel coming in off at the needle valve here. And so if this needle is bad, or if this float is not set properly, or if there's grooves in this needle valve here, it's not going to shut that fuel off all the way. Fuel is going to continue to drain into that carburetor. It's going to fill this housing up with fuel, fill this housing where the jets are up with fuel, and it's going to dump out the overflow. So you want to make sure that this needle is in good condition. If you've got a motorcycle that's constantly dripping fuel on your floor there, you put it on a side stand, it continues to drip fuel. It's because these needle valves are not adjusted properly, or because they are too worn, or because they are damaged. Now, what you can do to inspect this needle valve here, take a pick or a small screwdriver, lift up on that pin. It shouldn't take a whole lot of pressure there. There's the pin there. Now you can take and remove your needle valve there and remove your float there. Again, these are adjustable. You've got a little aluminum tab here that can be adjusted up or down. You want to make sure that if you're doing that, you want to make sure that that needle valve is in good condition, and then make sure you check your float height according to your manual. So again, you're not starving that motorcycle for fuel. You can remove this needle valve off of this float here by just taking it all the way to the end there. It's a tight fit, and remove it just like that. Now, it doesn't matter which direction this goes on there. That clip is right in the center. You do want to make sure that when you go back together, that clip is, or that needle is all the way on to that metal groove there. Now, to pull the other side of the carburetor here, what you do is remove these 3 Phillips screws. You're going to have the exact same thing underneath of there. It's going to be your float here, it's going to be your needle valve, and it's going to be your pin. You're going to have an O-ring here. Make sure you inspect that. Make sure it's in good condition. On this side, you want to make sure that if you're seeing the R here, you want to make sure that you remove this cotter pin that's right here on this arm. So it's straight up. This arm here at the top is a pin. You want to make sure you remove that if you're going to go ahead and pull this cover off of this carburetor here. Again, I don't want to have to go through all of this again because this video is getting pretty long, but you're going to have the exact same thing underneath of this cover here. Again, blow through there, make sure it's all cleaned out. You don't want to spray carbon choke cleaner on these O-rings here, or you could potentially damage those O-rings. It just makes them a little weaker, just like it would be on the diaphragm. Okay, going back together then, take your needle valve there and your float, slide it into place, being careful you don't damage the tip of that needle valve. Those are rubber, they get grooved, they get worn, you do have to replace those from time to time. Okay, now what we're gonna do is take your other half of your carburetor there. As long as that O-ring is seated properly, you can just take and set that into place. Now, there's only going to be one direction that this carburetor is going to go because of the way that these are spaced out. So make sure you look before you take and try to push that on in the wrong direction. Slide that into place there. Now, what I like to do when I'm sliding it into place, leave it in this position here. Take your arm that's underneath here. You can see me moving it there. When you set this down on top of there, slide that arm into place there so you're not having to try to fight that later. Now you've got that set into place. As long as everything is seated properly, that arm isn't going to pop out of that groove there. You can take then and put a couple of these screws in there. And I do that at this point just so I can hold that O-ring into place. If I'm moving this carburetor around, back and forth, flipping it upside down, you have a potential, if this cover isn't on there tight, you have the potential for that O-ring to move out of place. You're going to get this carburetor completely back on your motorcycle here. If that O-ring is not in the correct position, it will start leaking fuel immediately when you turn that fuel on. So you want to make sure that those O-rings are in good condition. If you've purchased a rebuild kit, then O-ring will come with it. You want to make sure that you use those O-rings. Now you can take and flip it back over. Remember that you've got your pin that you need to slide back on here. And sometimes you got to get your hand in behind here to push on this. These, you want to make sure that they are completely straight and flat. Take your screwdriver then, push that pin in position there and kind of hold it there. And you can take that cotter pin, slide it in there, grab the other side, and pull it down. Now make sure you take and bend those ends up. That way it doesn't come apart or slide out once it's in there. And I like to take and bend both sides. Now we can take, and it doesn't matter at this point what you do first, if you do your top diaphragm or your bottom side first there. We're gonna take our pilot jet, again making sure it's cleaned out and in good condition. And our main jet, slide it in there. Both of these are brass jets, so you don't have to really tighten them down a whole bunch. And then take and snug these up. Now we have your bottom cap here we can put on. Again, inspecting that O-ring, make sure it's in good condition. There's not really a groove for this to sit in. It can kind of slide all over the place, but you do want to make sure that when you get these small screws in there, that they're going in there straight and that you're not cross-threading these, because these are, this is an aluminum carburetor and you can do that very, very easily. So make sure they're going in there straight. Now that's on. Now what I'm gonna do is put our choke assembly back together. If this arm does come off, that's okay. You just wanna make sure that, because this arm has a groove in it, or this arm has a groove in it, that this linkage slides into. So if you're having a hard time getting this back together, it may be because that groove that's on this linkage here, that runs all the way down, has a groove in it. So you wanna make sure that that is in the correct position. Now you can take and slide that back onto your choke plunger. You've got a plastic washer that needs to go on there, as well as another aluminum washer. And then you can slide that into place there. You wanna make sure that plastic washer does fall into its groove there, so that this slides up and down. You can, at this point, tighten this screw, and it should still be able to go up and down. If that plastic washer is not in the right place, you probably won't be able to take your finger and move it as easily as that. So again, just make sure that plastic washer is in place. Now to get the top diaphragm put back in this carburetor, take your diaphragm and your slide there, slide your needle down right into the center hole there. Now I like to take my keeper, slide it in place there, take my pinky or a finger and slide it down. Now I like to take that diaphragm, put it just like that. Now this slide is directional. It'll actually only go one direction. So it looks like it could go either direction, but it will only go one direction. Make sure your needle is slid into the correct spot there. And now this is very important that you take and get this diaphragm put into that groove there. You want to make sure it's completely seated. Now if you have gotten carbon choke cleaner or fuel or another cleaner onto this diaphragm, more than likely it's not going to seat down in that groove very easily. Take your cap then. Once your spring is slid on there, make sure your spring sits on that tab there. I like to keep my finger underneath of that slide there just to make sure everything is seated properly before I let go of that slide altogether. Because if we accidentally take our thumb off of the top cap here on this carburetor and that diaphragm slides out of place, your motorcycle is not going to run like it should. So it's important that that diaphragm sits in the place there. All right, once you get at least 3 of them tightened up, you can take your finger off of that slide there and make sure that all 4 of those screws are snugged up. Now what you can do to kind of test your diaphragm out, take compressed air, very lightly blow it into this orifice here. Your slide should raise up just like that and should come down just like that. That means that diaphragm area is seated properly and in good working condition. Same on this side here. It should go up and down freely with no issues. Here is the carburetors that I just cleaned here. And these are the ones that I set in that ultrasonic cleaner for far too long. I've got them cleaned and ready to go. They are in a very, very good condition, but there was no reason for me to leave those in there for 3 or 4 days. To be quite honest, I completely forgot they were in there until about 3 days later. And I was just really hoping that they weren't all going to be destroyed. So they're not. They're in good condition. They're in no better condition than they would have been if I would have just cleaned it for like an hour or 2. So keep that in mind. Now we've got a brute force we're going to be taking apart. We've got a Vulcan motor over here that is going to get torn down. I'm going to do some videos on that machine there.